Hi, welcome to the session on Beyond the Battle of the Books, Alternative Ways to Promote Literacy to K through 12 Readers. I'm Nathan Sun-Kleinberger. I'm teacher librarian at Mill Creek Middle School in Kent, Washington. I will be joined by Jessica Barber, who's a literacy specialist at Bow Lake Elementary in the Highline School District, and my Kent colleague, Scott Quinn, who is the teacher librarian at Meeker Middle School, and also in the Kent School District. Here is today's agenda for this session. First, we're going to talk about who we are and our reading journeys, both as educators and as readers. And for two, we'll talk about the Battle of the Books 101, an abbreviated history of the Battle of the Books, and what the Battle of the Books does and doesn't do for student literacy. Then we'll talk about the 2024 Nations Report Card based upon a standardized tests that are given to students throughout the world and what it says about American kids and their reading. Then our first reading alternative number one, the Readathon, a kind of friendly competition between staff and students at my school. Jess will talk about reading alternative number two, the 40 book challenge, rather, that she does in her classroom. And Scott will talk about reading alternative number three, something he does called the book binge. And finally, we'll have a challenge to you. We want you to consider what the goal of literacy and reading is in your classroom for your students. And based upon those goals, does the Battle of the Books or any type of literacy meet it? And if it doesn't, what are you willing to do to make sure that our... So before we talk about getting to reading and literacy, let's talk about a little about who we are and our background. So my name is Nathan Sun-Kleinberger. I'm the teacher librarian at Mill Creek Middle School in Kent, Washington. It's a pretty diverse school with over 900 students. We have over 60 languages spoken, and a majority of our students are either immigrants or refugees, and over 80% are on free reduced lunch. A quarter of our students are Hispanic, and about an eighth of our students are practicing Muslims. So we have students from all over the place, and over 50% of our students get multilingual services. I'm a former ELA and a social studies teacher at the high school level, which I did for 16 years. I'm also a former national board certified teacher. Was in ELA for secondary schools. I have taught all grades, K through 12 and college. I've taught 1 year of elementary. I'm teaching middle school right now. I've taught high school, and I taught in grad school some college students as well. I'm a parent to 3 lovely daughters, who I'll talk about in a second, and I'm husband to Jessica, who's also part of this presentation. There's a picture of me in my library checking out books. There's a picture of me and a group of students with authors Christian Page and Kristen Tubb at the Cavalcade of Authors West last year in May. There's my 3 daughters, Nora, who's 12, Aviva, who's 17, and Sophia, who's also 12.
Hi, I'm Jessica Barber. I'm a third grade language and literacy specialist. I do that part-time at Bow Lake, and then I serve as a third grade literacy teacher the other part-time. I have been in the classroom for 25 years, kindergarten through 5th. Most of the years have been in the classroom, and that has been in the state of Kansas and now Washington. I'm a passionate reader. I always have been, and as Nathan said, I'm his wife, and we have 3 beautiful daughters.
My name is Scott Quinn. I'm the teacher librarian at Meeker Middle School in Kent School District. We are a Title I school serving 6th to 8th grade, and we have many different language groups. Both of those are things that need to be taken into consideration when you're looking at ways to encourage and promote a reading culture. So I have been at Meeker Middle School since 2018. Prior to that, I was the teacher librarian at Kent Valley Early Learning Center, working with preschool and kindergarten. When people ask, I tell them it is not nearly as different as you might think. I have over 15 years experience in libraries. 10 of those have been as a teacher librarian.
Since we talked a little about ourselves, let's talk about our reading journey. If we are going to talk about literacy, we need to kind of know where each of us come through or come as readers. So here's 4 books that kind of shaped me as a reader to where I am today. First book, I'm a huge Arnold Lobel fan, and especially Frog and Toad. I've read this book to my children, and also my mother read it to me when I was a child. And what I love about Arnold Lobel and Frog and Toad books, the universal themes about friendship and camaraderie, but also that the fact that I get something different out of these books when I was a kid and did as an adult. The next book on my reading journey I think about is The Once and Future King, the epic 600-page tale of the King Arthur series that's like kind of T.H. White's is the kind of the authoritative Arthurian legend. I first was introduced to this book in, I believe, 6th or 7th grade, and I was going to a small private Jewish school, and our teacher said that if student who finished reading it legitimately, she would take them to a fancy restaurant. And it was the first 600-page book I read, at least in school. And I remember me and 2 of my best friends at the time, we went to a nice steak restaurant, and we felt accomplishment for reading such a huge book in school. Another book that, so now I talked about my formative books as a reader. Let me talk about my books that have kind of shaped me as a teacher and a librarian. Frankenstein, for one. I first was exposed to the book itself in college and in grad school, and I was TAing a class called The Monsters in Literature, and the professors, they tried very hard to scare the lights out of the students by talking about like famous horror stories. Frankenstein, Dracula, the Doctor of Marilyn Monroe, so on and so forth. And I took that knowledge with me to the classroom when I taught 10th grade, and my students loved reading the book to find out what it was about, but also what it wasn't about, because they based their knowledge on Frankenstein based upon the myth from the 1929 Jimmy Whale version.
It's really hard for me to choose my top favorite formative books, teaching books. So I broke the rules and kind of just chose 5 that I wanted to tell you about. First of all is all of the Ramona Quimby series. I loved Beverly Cleary as a child. I would read the series over and over and over. And my last tattoo I got was of Ramona Quimby screaming and yelling at the world. The next book that I have featured is Jacqueline Woodson's Harbor Me. I discovered Jacqueline Woodson probably about 10 years ago as I read her Brown Girl Dreaming, and I love her writing. Harbor Me is about a group of children who meet in a class, and they are on Friday afternoons left alone in a classroom every Friday just to get to know each other, and they really get to know each other and build these strong bonds of friendship. And it is a wonderful read aloud. I read it aloud to fourth graders at the end of the year.
My reading journey, Nathan made me trim this down. So, formative books. There are a bunch of books I loved as a kid. I picked Richard Scarry's What Do People Do All Day. It was the one that was taped up with tape and had a duct tape spine to keep it together. It's an appealing book. It's interesting. You can open it up and read book bits here and there. It also is very stereotyped. I didn't realize it at the time, but it came from the 70s, so. Second one for formative books, P.G. Wodehouse. I have Lord Emsworth there. I was introduced to Jeeves and Wooster first. Kind of wished I was Wooster, but really I identify more with Lord Emsworth. Introduced me to when I realized the value of fun, escapist, and silly. Last one, Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time. Perseverance. It took me a long time to get through A Wrinkle in Time. The first time I actually stopped and moved on to Meet the Austins and then came back to try it again. This is one of my first extraterrestrial science fiction fantasy type books that I remember reading. And the cover, that's a copy of the cover, the one that I had. It probably didn't help much with the man with red eyes there. I didn't quite get that at the beginning. Thought that was one of the Mrs. W's. Let's see, what else? So I managed to get through that. And now I reread it pretty much every year in October when we start to get dark and stormy nights and it's possible to get caught in a downdraft and blown off course. Teaching books. The one you've probably been looking at the whole time. Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I don't really like the Diary of a Wimpy Kid series personally. There's no character development and I get bored after a couple pages. However, I fight for it for my students because it's fluff like the Woodhouse one over there. It's sort of a literary same food. You know what you are going to get and you don't have to worry about it. You can pick it up. You can read a little bit anywhere because, not much happens and changes. It doesn't matter if you flipped open to the front of the book or page 100. You can read a little bit here, a little bit there. It's safe. It's comforting. A lot of our kids need that, especially with the modern world the way it is. So, my side of the mountain. Teachers have read to me throughout my school experience, but Toby Welch in 5th grade reading My Side of the Mountain is one of the first where I really remember it coming alive because of the reading. I wish I knew where he was now, actually, but anyway, similarly, my librarian at the time, Vicki Pond, introduced me to the magic of live storytelling without a book. She had tales of her life on the tropical paradise of Midway Island. And I eventually connected that with the pictures my grandpa had of what Midway Island was really like. But the stories were amazing. So the last one, it was kind of hard to pick. I picked The Dark Matter of Mona Starr. I've been pro-graphic novel pretty much throughout my career as a librarian, but eventually you hit one where you realize just how the format can tell stories in ways that you can't do otherwise. Dark Matter of Mona Starr is one of those where you look at it and think it's kind of like, wow, the author did an amazing job using the format to tell this story, and they couldn't have done it otherwise. Many would say Mouse did it and did it much earlier, but for me, the weight of the subject matter in that story kind of got in the way of realizing it. So that's why I put a different one up there.
So let's talk about the Battle of the Books and a brief history of it in public schools and about literacy related to the Battle of the Books. Battle of the Books is a reading quiz show competition similar to like Jeopardy, but about books. Battle of the Books has readers from grades 3 through 12, but generally it focuses on elementary and a little bit of middle school students. The students read in teams of 3 to 4, either books of 12, 24, or 36. They're chosen by teacher, librarians, and or parents. And then there's competitions at the school, district, state, and even a national level. The first known Battle of the Books competition was a radio quiz show organized by the Chicago Public Library as a response to a national literacy panic set off by Orson Welles' famous radio broadcast of War of the Worlds in 1938. And there was a big push in the Cold War to get kids to read because there was concern amongst adults, well, if they thought a fake radio broadcast about aliens taking over the Earth was real, well, clearly we need to have kids read more so they can have a better judgment about what difference between fact and fiction. While it was popular at state and local level in the 40s to the 70s, it was really the Reagan administration's report in 1984 of the quote-unquote Americans Report Card on Schools that created a national Battle of the Books movement. People were concerned, and especially politicians, that kids were not reading enough and literacy was low. And so there was kind of a movement to instill literacy and reading in kids. And thus an umbrella organization for the Battle of the Books called America's Battle of the Books was formed, which really kind of like made it a full national movement that was organized with this umbrella organization.
We are not anti-Battle of the Books, but what we are looking at is how we can more effectively use our time. So let's look at what the Battle of the Books does and doesn't do. So things it does. The books are chosen by teachers, librarians, and parents, not by the students. The trivia questions are developed by teachers and librarians. Again, not the students. They just answer them, and they're almost all level 1 recalls. The questions, again, they're short, one word or one idea answers. The students are not really interacting with the book. And the book selections are generally chosen to appeal to the high academic readers, are the people who are already reading, the people who are highly fluent in English, so we lose all of our language learners, and our IE students are not generally welcome. And yep, again, we are putting all this effort in to get our students who already read reading. So what Battle of the Books doesn't do. The students don't have the agency in choosing which books are being read. And it's important that we have our students learn how to pick a book that is right for them. The student feedback or input on the books is limited to just answering those recall questions. They're not tearing into them and coming up with their own questions, answering their own questions. They've got a limited ability to analyze the text there, unless they choose to do it on their own, but Battle of the Books does not encourage you to go beyond. And frequently, the book selections are white middle-class people. So they don't always represent a very broad range. We really can't. If you try to be very representative, there would be way too many books. And again, the struggling readers, the non-readers, the language learners, English language learners, either are or feel excluded from the program because they go into it knowing that the high cap students are the ones who are going to win.
Here's the nation's report card on reading. You are welcome to pause the video to read this, but I'm not going to read all the way through it for you. We know that the joy of reading is not something we can test, but we know it shows up on testing. Both before, during, and after students are learning phonics, we should be sharing the joy of reading with them.
Let's talk about the first reading alternative to the Battle of the Books, the readathon. So the readathon is a friend reading competition between staff and students at my school. Usually runs during the second semester from February to May. Staff read collective 225 books, while students read 2,025 books. We usually base it upon the year. So last year was 224, and the kids read 2,024, which comes to about 3 books per staff and about 3 books per kid. So every 200 pages is a book. So if a kid reads like a picture book, that's 1 book. But if a kid reads like a 600-page Harry Potter book, that could be considered 3 books. Any reading is reading. That's one of my big mantras throughout the competition. Be it printed books, audiobooks, ebooks, graphic novels, etc. Any reading is reading. I don't want them to judge language or format or style, but any type of reading is good reading, in my opinion. And students and staff log their reading online. I created through Microsoft Forms a form they fill out that's connected to our website, and I encourage anytime a kid checks out a book in the library for them to log their reading. In fact, I read picture books to the multilingual students every week, and when we do that, at the end, they log their reading every time after every book I read to them in class. So let's talk about reading alternative number 1 readathon and what its grounding and foundation is scholarly. So first is about restoring reading joy to kids. We are so focused these days in education on reading scores and Lexile levels and reading for information that we've gone away from the idea of just reading for the sake of reading, for reading for enjoyment. This is what's espoused by Donald Miller and Terry Lassente's book, The Joy of Reading. That we need to restore that culture of reading, that enjoyment of reading, making kids lifelong readers. I mean, the idea here that, kids now, they have so much of their selection for movies and TV and music, we need to expose them to a lot so they can create their own reading personality. Which leads to book number 2, offering student choice. Dr. Jared Amato, who's a teacher and has a PhD, has a book called Just Read It. In fact, I'm doing a book group on it right now. But he talks about how in his classroom that he really focuses it all around independent reading, or IR, and really about student choice. That doesn't mean that they're not using anchor texts, but he really wants the kids to be driven by what books they like. And as I talked about earlier, creating an own reading identity, reading different genres, figuring out what author you like, figuring what fiction and nonfiction you like. Okay, it takes time to do that. Kids have been doing from basically since birth, watching Netflix, using iTunes for listening to music, watching movies on Apple TV, whatever. Okay, but what we don't give them is the opportunity to become lifelong readers and get reading choice, especially if they are not near bookstores or have access to libraries or whatnot. In fact, Amato worked with his students to create something called #Project Lit, which basically is kids promoting books online, and it's become so popular that there are nationally known YA authors who are involved and embrace this so they can get published. And that leads to my next point, creating a community of readers. So how do I go about implementing the readathon? Well, like any big production, it takes lots of planning. I've been doing this now for 3 years, and so it's become a part of the culture of my school, but that took some time. And now I have the advantage where I meet with my administration every year in May or June to talk about next year's budget and what I want to accomplish and what the costs are for the readathon. And they are generous enough to include in the library budget some money for the event. Then I reach out to local organizations for sponsorship, because we have such a high poverty school and a lot of non-native English speakers at my school. We just don't have a PTA, and that's obviously a big challenge. So I've been very lucky to get annual sponsorship for both my local Rotary and Kiwanis Club, as well as some other businesses and organizations who underwrite the whole event. Then I invite a visiting author during each competition. So I'm having Christian Page, who's a local presenter and poet, to come. Last year we were very lucky to have the national a youth ambassador, and as well as a Newbery Prize winner, Meg Medina, to come to the school. That was sponsored by the Library of Congress. And so the kids can meet real authors rather, and so that writing and reading becomes like an actual thing, a tangible thing to them. Then I have a monthly reader spotlight. I usually have a staff member and student and talk about the reading habits and books that they recommend in the school. I have them create a video. We have a display in the school. We also have something called #GotMyBook Project, where any book a kid wants, if it's not in the catalog, we'll order it from them, and we display that as well. We put a little label in the book that says this book was recommended by, so the kids have some agency, and they have their mark in the library. And then I team with the leadership teacher and students, and they promote the event by making posters, they do videos, and
Reading alternative number 2 is the 40 Book Challenge. This comes from Donna Lynn Miller's work. You can read more about it in the book Whisper or any of her work. What is it? It challenges students to read 40 books in one school year. This number can be adjusted. For example, if you're working with younger kids, you might want to have them read more books. For older kids, if they're reading longer books, you can adjust the number, or sometimes I will count books over 200 pages as 2 books. That is up to you and what your students are capable of. I do this with students who are of all reading levels, from beginning readers to advanced readers to multilingual readers. It works with all students. It allows students to read a variety of books at their reading level and their interest level. So, as you can see in this picture, this student loves cars, and so that's what he wanted to read about. He was reading about cars. It engaged him. He was excited, and it motivated him to read. It allows for books in all formats and languages. It does not limit. My grounding foundation for the 40 Book Challenge is the book Whisper by Donna Lynn Miller. As I was getting more and more into independent reading, my friend Amy, who is a librarian that I've known my whole career, recommended this book. Actually, she recommended this book many, many times to me before I read it. And in this, it was a very easy read. Donna Lynn explains that this is something that she has always done. And it's a very easy thing for the teacher to take on. It challenges every student to read 40 books. It's guided by adult readers, and it does not limit them on what they can read. And there really are no rules. The premise is to create a love of reading. So how is this implemented? Well, I'll go through that. So what the teacher does, you're going to introduce and organize the challenge. And really, it's the introduction. The big piece of this is conferencing with students regularly. I make a point for the students to keep track of their books, and I check in with them. I try to check in with them once every 2 weeks. My striving readers who are struggling a little bit more, I'm going to check in with them sooner than that. My readers who are taking off, I'm going to let them be and just kind of keep a visual eye on them and make sure that they're still finishing books. Another job the teacher has is to recommend books. So that can be through, I just keep a book pile on my desk. Oh, I read this book over the weekend. If you like fantasy, you might like this. If you like books about friendships, you might like this. Another way to recommend books is First Chapter Fridays, where you just read the first chapter of a book And then I draw sticks. Do you want this book? Do you want this book?
The goals of the book binge are similar to the goals of the other programs here, to promote the joy of reading by providing accessibility, flexibility, and an opportunity for students to figure out and find what books they want to read. Book binge started in October 2019, which was not exactly a propitious time for programs. Nathan and I were looking at a way to encourage a wide variety of students to read books that they enjoy. Since then, we've tweaked it to work better in the schools. Because this is school-wide, it's needed to be scalable, so staff sets up the framework, checks submissions, entreats students to participate, and provides support as needed to students. Otherwise, it's pretty much student-driven. Anyone can participate, picking books that work for them. There are no language or complexity requirements or length requirements or even any sort of censorship. We want our students to be reading, and whatever they want to read, more power to them, because we want this to continue beyond the program. A book binge was planned around universal design for learning. We looked for ways to provide flexibility and student choice to provide engagement and autonomy, and multiple methods for showing that students were reading and engaged to provide the action and expression method. So it welcomes all students, and that includes inclusive education and language learners, because they can interact with the books they choose and in the way that they choose that works best for them. Additionally, with the students being able to share with others about their books, little book talks, that provides an opportunity for an authentic audience in discussing reading for the students. It's also non-competitive, so it welcomes all students, whereas a program such as Battle of the Books is canted very strongly towards high cap. Book binge was planned as a school-wide program, so it was necessary that we make sure that library staff did not have too much to do to keep it up. So it's somewhat front-loaded for the librarian. The teacher sets up categories for the month. I usually pick around 4 to 5, including at least one genre, possibly one form, and a couple other things, such as a book you haven't read by an author you like, a book that's part of a series. One time I even did a book that the cover is in your favorite color. Just things that can get students to look for, hopefully, maybe a book that they haven't tried otherwise, but has enough flexibility that they can get one that they are truly interested in. So the students are in charge of selecting and reading their own books, so you do not need to force them to read anything. I put up displays, I do book conferences as wanted, but I don't limit the students. They get to choose what they want. If they can justify the book into one of those categories, then it works. So I created a questionnaire for students to fill out after reading to ensure that they actually did read the book. This year I used Microsoft Forms, and I set it up so that they put in title, author, and genre, and after there it branches out. Students can choose what they want to answer. It can be either a character that they liked in the book, talk about a favorite part in the book, something that you would have done differently if you were the author, stuff like that, to show that they have read and interacted with the book. And then I also created a student-generated book talk page. Prior years I had done it on Flipgrid. Unfortunately, that is no longer possible, so I am using Padlet. This allows students to talk about literature with an authentic audience of their peers. You can see on the slide I have a snippet of the Padlet page. There's students can do a video book talk, an audio book talk. They can put in text, or they can put in some sort of an artistic thing. You can see I did my sort of salting the mind video book talk there, and another student there has a artistic drawing book talk. So the students, on the other hand, what they do, they pick a book that they like, with or without help. They read the book, and then they choose what after-read activities they want to do, and then do them. And then the only ongoing thing the librarian needs to do is change the book displays as needed, book conferences as wanted, and checking in to assign points as the students do their book binge after-read activities.
So, what is our goal to promote literacy to students? One is the joy of reading. All of us here, and those of you watching this video, more than likely have that joy of reading. You love reading, and that's probably why you became a librarian. Number two is to build that habit of reading. A habit of reading is not a reading log or a forced reading time each night before you go to bed that you have to do in order to get a grade. It's picking up a book when you want to and reading. Number three, students should be able to self-select books they can read and enjoy in any format, in any language. That includes graphic novels, audiobooks, books in their home languages, books that they want to read and can read, or can hear and hear a story that will bring them joy. Thank you for coming to our presentation. If you have any questions or comments, our email addresses are on the first slide of this presentation. Thank you.